Okay, and welcome to this video on resting potential. Here we've got an axon which is part of a nerve cell, and we can see the membrane of the axon here on both sides and the centre of the axon, right, the intracellular space here. Call the area around it, of course, the extracellular fluid on either side of the membrane. The axon membrane here, representative here, are the proteins embedded in the axon membrane. We've got a sodium-potassium pump, we've got sodium voltage gates here, and we've got potassium channels here as well. Remember, this is also replicated in the membrane below, although it's not shown. The resting potential is about maintaining a potential difference across the membrane, okay, and this is done for all cells, and it's in particular, of course, important for nerve cells in order for them to be able to transmit impulses along the nerve cell. The resting potential is maintained at a difference between the inside and the outside of the membrane of -70 millivolts. That basically means that the inside is more negative than the outside, and simply the outside is more positive due to having more sodium and potassium ions than the inside of the membrane, which is more negative because it has less sodium and potassium ions. Now, it's the action of the sodium-potassium pump over here that helps to maintain this. Sodium, right, binds on, right, inside the membrane to the sodium-potassium pump, and potassium binds on from the outside, right, and it is transported using ATP, so it's active transport round, so that the sodium is released out into the extracellular fluid surrounding the axon, and the potassium comes to the intracellular fluid inside the axon. Okay? This repeats and does it many times, building up a concentration of potassium inside the axon and obviously a concentration of sodium outside the axon. Now, the sodium cannot diffuse back through into the axon, so it cannot diffuse down its concentration gradient because it can't go through the sodium voltage gated channels, which are closed. However, the potassium can diffuse down its concentration gradient because it can diffuse through the the potassium channels, which are open. So the potassium can go down its gradient and diffuse out, meaning that we end up with lots of positive ions, right, sodium and potassium, on the outside of the membrane, right, and we end up with few potassium and sodium ions on the inside of the membrane, and this means the inside of the membrane is comparatively negatively charged compared to the outside of the membrane, which is comparatively positively charged, and that maintains a difference of -70 millivolts potential difference between the inside and outside of the membranes. Hi, now we're going to deal with a situation where the nerve is stimulated and an action potential occurs. So where we currently are is we've got more positive charge on the outside of the membrane than we have on the inside, and of course that potential difference across is called the resting potential, and it's -70 millivolts. So we're here on the graph. What happens is, in the receptor, either a physical change or a chemical opens the sodium gates, and sodium diffuses down its concentration gradient into the axon, and this effectively reverses the charges, so it becomes now more positive inside the axon than outside the axon. This change in potential difference across the membrane means that voltage gated sodium channels nearby open, and of course sodium also diffuses down into the axon. If sufficient sodium diffuses down into the axon, then it will cause other nearby gates to open, and if sufficient gates open, then depolarization will occur. This is called the all or nothing response. So basically, if enough sodium comes through, right, to cause lots and lots of voltage gated channels to open, then we will get a reversal of the charges across the membrane. So now it's more positive inside the axon than it is outside the axon, and so we've had a reverse of the charges. It's now gone from minus 70 millivolts across the axon to plus 40 millivolts across the axon, with the inside being now positive compared to the outside. At this point, about 0.5 milliseconds after the start of depolarization, the sodium channels close and the voltage gated potassium channels open, allowing potassium, which is highly concentrated inside the axon, to diffuse rapidly out of the axon to the outside of the membrane. This repolarizes the membrane, so making it now more positive outside than inside the membrane. In fact, more potassium goes out than is needed to in fact restore the minus 70, and it goes to around about minus 90 millivolts across the membrane. And this bit here is called hyperpolarization. And so to restore afterwards the minus 70, the resting potential, right, the voltage gates shut, so the potassium voltage gates shut, and potassium then diffuses back through the potassium channels that are open in the membrane, and this gradually restores the minus 70 resting potential. Then after that, it's the sodium potassium pump and the potassium gates, potassium channels rather, that maintain the resting potential after that, and that's how an action potential comes about.